The hiss of the oxygen concentrator was the only sound in the penthouse. It was a sterile, lonely noise that filled the space between the marble floors and the 20-foot ceilings. Eva checked the flow rate, her fingers moving with an economy born of long shifts and short tempers. The light blue of her scrubs was the only soft color in a room of black leather, chrome, and smoked glass. She had been told the job was simple. High-paying, of course. The agency had been vague on the details, but the salary they offered could erase her student debt in a single year. She was to be a private nurse for a wealthy recluse recovering from a car accident. She had pictured an elderly man, perhaps a bit cantankerous. She had not pictured Dante Moretti. She had not pictured the absolute predatory stillness of a man caged inside his own body. He sat in the motorized wheelchair by the vast window, his back to her, a silhouette against the glittering teeth of the New York skyline. She had pictured a patient. But Dante Moretti was a presence, a weight in the air that seemed to bend the light around him. And as she finished her initial assessment, she knew with a certainty that chilled her skin that she was not in a sick room. She was in a throne room, and the king could not move. Her first week was a study in silence. He spoke only in clipped, one-word commands. Water, pill, turn. His voice was a low rasp, gravel ground under a diamond. He refused to meet her eyes, his gaze fixed on the city below or on the muted television screen playing financial news without sound. His men, broad-shouldered figures in dark suits who materialized from unseen rooms, treated her with a cold, professional distance. They called her Nurse Never Eva. They watched her every move, their eyes missing nothing, their expressions carved from stone. She learned his routine without his help. Physical therapy was a brutal, silent war he waged against his own limbs. He would strain against the resistance bands, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle would jump, a bead of sweat tracing a path from his temple down a jagged scar that disappeared into his hairline. He never made a sound of pain. He only radiated a black, helpless fury. Eva would guide his movements, her touch clinical and firm, her voice even as she counted out the repetitions. She was the only one who touched him. The intimacy of it was a violation they both chose to ignore. She was a professional, and he was a man who had forgotten what a gentle touch felt like. The accident, they had told her, had damaged his spinal cord at the thoracic level. Paralyzed from the waist down with limited control of his core. He could move his arms, his hands, but the immense strength that was coiled in his shoulders and chest had nowhere to go. It was all trapped, simmering behind eyes the color of burnt espresso. The event that changed everything happened on a Tuesday. One of his men, a capo named Marco with salt and pepper hair and a face like a Roman coin, was in the room while Eva was administering Dante's afternoon medication. Dante, as usual, was staring out the window, his expression unreadable. Eva drew the correct dosage into the syringe, her movements precise. "He is not eating enough," Marco said, his voice a low rumble. It was not an observation. It was an accusation. His appetite is suppressed. It's a common side effect of the nerve medication. Eva replied without looking up. "Change it." Eva finally paused, her eyes lifting to meet Marco's. "I don't change prescriptions, Marco. I administer them. His physician, Dr. Albrecht, sets the regimen. The doctor works for us," Marco said, as if that explained everything. "And I work for the patient's health," she countered, her voice quiet but unyielding. Undermining his medication could cause a severe reaction. "I won't do it." A heavy silence descended. From the corner of her eye, she saw Dante's head turn a fraction of an inch. He was listening. Marco took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. He was a big man used to getting his way through sheer presence. Eva did not flinch. She held his gaze, the syringe held steady in her hand. This was a world of force, but she was in her element. Medicine had its own, stricter laws. Suddenly, a choked gasp came from the wheelchair. Dante's body seized. A violent tremor ran through his upper torso, his hands clenching into white-knuckled fists on the armrests. His face went pale, a sheen of cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. Autonomic dysreflexia. a life-threatening spike in blood pressure. Eva had seen it once before in the ER.
Marco froze.
What is it? What's happening? Eva didn't answer. She was already moving. Get him flat, she commanded, her voice sharp, cutting through the panic in the room. She hit the recline button on the wheelchair, the mechanism whirring as it lowered Dante's back. Loosen his collar. Now! Marco fumbled with the button on Dante's shirt. Eva was already checking for the cause. A kink in his catheter tubing, a pressure sore, anything. Her hands were quick, efficient, impersonal. She found it. His belt buckle was digging into his skin, a small, cruel point of pressure his body was screaming about, even if his brain couldn't feel it. She unbuckled it instantly. Call Albrecht, she ordered Marco, not taking her eyes off Dante's face. Tell him we had a dysreflexic episode. Stimulus removed, monitoring vitals. She reached for the blood pressure cuff, her movements a blur of competence. She could feel Dante's eyes on her. For the first time, he was truly looking at her. Not through her. She saw not just the pain, but a flicker of something else. Shock, and a terrifying, unwilling dependence. The crisis passed as quickly as it came. His color returned. The tremors subsided. By the time Marco was off the phone, Dante was breathing evenly, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The only evidence of the event was the sweat cooling on his skin and the profound exhaustion in his eyes. Marco stood by the door, watching her with a new, unnerving respect. The doctor said you handled it perfectly. Eva simply nodded, wiping Dante's forehead with a cool cloth. She had done her job. That was all. She thought that was the end of it. She thought she had established her authority, her place in this strange, cold kingdom. But as she was leaving for the night, passing the study where Marco was speaking in a hushed, urgent tone on the phone, she overheard a few words that stopped her cold. Not an accident. We know it wasn't. The car was tampered with. Whoever tried to kill him is still out there. And they're getting impatient. Eva slipped out of the apartment, the quiet click of the door echoing in the hallway. She had thought her only battle was with the patient's stubbornness and the body's betrayal. But the real danger wasn't the broken spine. It was the snake that broke it, and it was still in the garden. She was no longer just a nurse. She was a potential witness. Complication. And in Dante Moretti's world, complications were surgically removed. The weeks that followed were different. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was charged, filled with unspoken things. Dante watched her now. His dark eyes followed her as she moved through the apartment, a silent, constant assessment. He never mentioned the episode, but the dynamic had shifted. She had seen him at his most vulnerable, a king utterly powerless, and she had not flinched or exploited it. She had simply done her job. In his world, that kind of loyalty was not hired. It was earned. The threat she had overheard became a low hum beneath the surface of their days. A delivery van parked across the street for too long. A flicker in the building's power grid that made her heart leap into her throat, her mind instantly going to the machines that kept him stable. She started noticing the details. The way Marco always tasted Dante's food before it was served. The way another guard, a younger man named Leo, would sweep her small bag for electronics every time she arrived. This was not a sick room. It was a fortress under siege. One evening, she found him in the study. He had wheeled himself in front of a wall of framed photographs. Old, black-and-white pictures of men in dark suits and fedoras, and newer, color photos of a younger Dante. In one, he stood beside another young man, nearly his twin, both of them grinning, arms slung around each other's shoulders. They were on a boat, the sun catching the highlights in their dark hair. Dante looked happy. It was a startling, alien expression on his face. "My brother," he said, his voice quiet. He did not look at her, but he knew she was there. "Antonio." Eva stood in the doorway, her hands tucked into the pockets of her scrubs. "He looks like you." "He was better than me," Dante said. The statement was flat, a piece of granite dropped into a still pool. More life in him. He was in the passenger seat. The words hung in the air. He was in the passenger seat. The accident. The one that wasn't an accident. This was his wound. The one deeper than the severed nerves in his spine. It was not just his body that had been broken. It was guilt. He had been driving. He had survived. His brother, the one with more life in him, had not. "I'm sorry," she said, the words feeling small and useless. He finally turned his head, his eyes locking with hers. "Sorry doesn't bring him back, nurse." His voice was cold again. The wall of ice rebuilt. But she had seen the crack. She had seen the grief that fueled his rage. She could have left. She could have called the agency, cited a hostile work environment, and been gone within the hour. No one would have blamed her. It was the smart thing to do, the sane thing. Instead, she walked further into the room. "No, it doesn't," she said, her voice steady. "But sitting here staring at ghosts won't either. It's time for your physical therapy." His eyes narrowed. A challenge passed between them. He was testing her, waiting for her to back down from his grief, from his anger. She held his gaze. She was not afraid of his ghosts. She dealt with the living. Therefore, because she refused to be pushed away, because she treated him not as a monster or a tragic figure but simply as her patient, the traitor watching from the shadows made a new calculation. The nurse was not just staff. She was becoming part of his armor. And armor had to be pierced. The first direct move came a week later. It was subtle. A bottle of his medication, one she had just unsealed that morning, had a loose cap. She caught it during her routine check. A simple thing, easy to dismiss as a manufacturing defect. But she saw the faint smudge on the label, the almost imperceptible disturbance of the dust on the shelf around it. Someone had been there. Her blood ran cold. She took the bottle, and instead of using it, she palmed a dose from the previous bottle she had not yet discarded. She said nothing to Dante, nothing to Marco. She just watched. The next attempt was less subtle. Eva was preparing his evening meal in the kitchen, a simple broth he could tolerate. She turned her back for a moment to get a spoon from a drawer. When she turned back, Leo, the younger guard, was standing too close to the counter. "Marco sent me to check on things," he said, his smile a little too wide, a little too bright. "Everything is fine," Eva said, her eyes fixed on the pot of broth. "Smells good," he said, leaning over it. Her eyes darted to his hand, to the small vial he was trying to palm as he gestured. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She acted without thinking. She grabbed the heavy salt shaker from the counter and tripped, stumbling into him and knocking the shaker from her own hand. It flew through the air, hitting the pot with a loud clang and splashing hot broth across the front of his expensive suit. He swore, jumping back. "Watch it." "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice filled with manufactured panic. "I must have slipped." In the chaos, she saw the vial fall from his now open hand and roll under the industrial refrigerator. He shot her a look of pure venom before Marco came striding into the kitchen, drawn by the noise. "What happened?"
Marco demanded.
"My fault," Eva said quickly, grabbing a towel. "I was clumsy. I'll make a fresh pot." Leo, his face a mask of fury, could say nothing. He mumbled an excuse and left the kitchen. Eva's hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. She had a face now. She knew who the snake was. Later that night, when she found the vial, her suspicions were confirmed. It was a potent, fast-acting sedative. Enough to interact with his other medications and stop his heart. They would have blamed her, the clumsy nurse who gave him the wrong dose. She had to tell Dante. But how? She couldn't go to Marco, not knowing if he was involved. She had to get Dante alone, and she had to make him believe her. She waited until late, after Marco had left for the night, when it was just her and the night guard stationed down the hall. She went to his room. He was awake, staring at the ceiling, his jaw tight. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. He turned his head on the pillow, his eyes dark. "I don't talk. You'll listen," she said, her voice low and urgent. She walked to his bedside and held up the vial. Leo tried to put this in your food tonight. It's a sedative. It would have killed you. He looked from the vial to her face. He saw the genuine fear in her eyes, the tremor in her hand. But he also saw the resolve. He said nothing, his expression unreadable. Doubt, suspicion, and a flicker of something she could not name warred in his eyes. He had lived his entire life in a world of betrayal. Why should she be any different? Why would he do that? Dante asked, his voice a dead, flat thing. I don't know, she admitted. But someone is trying to finish the job they started with the car crash. And they tried to use me to do it. This was it. The moment where he would either believe her or have her removed. She had crossed a line. She was no longer just a nurse. She was an accuser, a player in their deadly game. She had interfered. She had chosen a side. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the hum of the machinery by his bed. She thought he was going to call the guard. She braced herself. Instead, he said 2 words. Prove it. It was not the reaction she expected. It was a challenge, and a chance. She had to do something more, something to break through the armor of a man who trusted no one. She thought of the stories Marco sometimes told late at night of Dante's past, of his reputation before the accident. A man who was feared, yes, but also respected. A man who led from the front. A man with a name his soldiers used. A call sign from a forgotten war in the city's underbelly. She took a breath. Leo is working for whoever wants you dead. We can use that. We can set a trap. But you have to trust me. You have to listen to me. He turned his face away, a gesture of dismissal. Get out. His rejection was like a physical blow. She had failed. She had put herself at risk for nothing. Frustration and a strange, fierce protectiveness surged through her. She was not going to let this man die out of sheer, stubborn pride. No, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, fierce and raw. She leaned closer. Cerberus. The reaction was instantaneous. His entire body went rigid. His head snapped back toward her, his eyes wide with a stunned, violent shock. It was as if she had reached into his chest and grabbed his heart. No one had called him that in years. It was a name from another life, a name that belonged to the man who could walk, the man who could fight, the man who had stood beside his brother. It was the name of the man he had been, the man he thought was dead. He stared at her, and for the first time, she saw the walls crumble. She saw the man, not the boss. The man who was trapped, hunted, and alone. How do you know that name? He whispered, his voice hoarse. I listen, she said simply. Now, are you going to listen to me? The silence that followed was different. It was not a void. It was a bridge. He gave a single, sharp nod. That was the confession. Not of love, not of affection, but of something far more dangerous in his world. Trust. But in reaching him, in using that name, she had bound herself to him in a way she could never undo. She had announced her allegiance not just to him, but to the ghost of the man he was. And Leo, who was surely watching them through some hidden camera, now knew for certain. The nurse was not a pawn. She was the queen's guard, and she had to be taken off the board. The trap was simple. Eva's medical knowledge was their only unique weapon. The next day, she went about her duties as if nothing had happened. She was polite to Leo, even apologetic about the spilled broth. She could feel his eyes on her, feel his suspicion. That afternoon, following the plan she and Dante had devised in the quiet hours of the night, she prepared an injection. It was only saline, but she handled it with the gravity of a potent drug. She left it on the medical cart, clearly labeled, and then made an excuse to leave the room for a few minutes, asking Leo to keep an eye on things. It was the oldest trick in the book. The bait. From a tablet connected to a hidden security feed, she and Dante watched from his bedroom. They saw Leo enter the room, look around, and then quickly swap the syringe she had left with one from his own pocket. He was so sure of himself, so confident in her ignorance. When Eva returned, she picked up the syringe Leo had planted. She walked over to Dante's chair. He was watching her, his face a perfect mask of indifference. For anyone else, it would have looked like any other day. But Eva saw the tension in his shoulders, the tight line of his jaw. He was trusting her completely. His life was literally in her hands. She prepped the injection site on his arm. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. This was the point of no return. She looked at him, a silent question in her eyes. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. She pushed the plunger. Within a minute, Dante began to gasp. His eyes rolled back in his head, and a simulated seizure, induced by a non-lethal drug she had given him earlier that morning, racked his body. It looked terrifyingly real. She screamed. Leo and Marco burst into the room. Leo had a look of triumphant horror on his face. It was working. "What did you do?" Marco roared, grabbing her arm. "I don't know," she cried, playing the part of the hysterical, incompetent nurse. "It was his afternoon medication. He just started shaking." Leo stepped forward. "She must have given him the wrong dose. She's been acting strange all week." But as he spoke, Dante's eyes opened. The seizure stopped as abruptly as it had begun. And he was not looking at Eva or Marco. He was looking directly at Leo. And for the first time in a long time, there was not a trace of helplessness in his gaze. There was only cold, absolute certainty. "The syringe, Marco?" Dante said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a death sentence. "Check the one she used." Marco, confused, picked up the discarded syringe. He knew medicine. He looked at the markings, smelled the faint residue. "This isn't his medication. It's something else." Leo's face went white. He started to back away. I don't know anything about that." "You switched it," Dante stated. It was not a question. "When she left the room, we watched you." The color drained from Leo's face. He knew he was caught. In his panic, he made his final, fatal mistake. He pulled a small pistol from the back of his waistband and grabbed Eva, hauling her in front of him as a shield. "Nobody move!" he yelled, his voice cracking. The gun was pressed against her temple. Marco froze, his hand halfway inside his own jacket. The room was locked in a tense standoff. Eva's mind raced. The gun was cold against her skin. She could feel Leo's body trembling behind her. He was desperate, and desperate men were predictable. Dante did not look at Leo. He looked at her. His face was carved from ice. "Let her go, Leo." "Not a chance," Leo sneered. "You're finished, Dante. Everyone knows you're weak. A cripple in a chair. My patron will be running this city by next week." He was monologuing. It was the mistake they always made. Eva knew she had only a second. She had to create a diversion. She had to change the equation. Using the leverage of his arm around her neck, she stomped her heel down, hard, not on his foot, but on the sensitive electronic control panel of Dante's wheelchair. The chair, programmed with a panic response protocol Dante had designed, shot backward at full speed. It slammed into the wall with a sickening crunch. It was the last thing Leo expected. His head jerked toward the sound, his grip loosening on her for a fraction of a second. It was all Marco needed. A single, muffled shot echoed in the room. Leo's body went limp, slumping against her before sliding to the floor. Silence. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. Eva stood trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Marco was already on his phone, his voice low and cold, giving orders. "Cleaning it up." She looked over at Dante. His chair was damaged, wedged against the wall, but he was unharmed. He was looking at her, and the expression in his eyes was one she had never seen before. It was raw, unguarded, and utterly consuming. He had been prepared to watch her die, and she had saved herself. More than that, she had saved him. The cost of that day was Leo's life, a mess on the Persian rug that would be gone within the hour. But another cost was paid, too. The professional line between Eva and Dante was erased. She had acted not as a nurse, but as an ally, a soldier in his war. Later that night, after the bodies and the evidence had vanished as if they had never existed, She stood by the great window, looking down at the city lights. The apartment was silent again, but it was a different silence. The threat was gone for now. She heard the soft whir of his backup wheelchair approaching. He stopped beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "He said my patron will be running this city," Dante said finally, his voice a low murmur. "Leo was just a soldier. The man who gave the order is still out there." "I know," she said. She was not naive. This was not over. "You should leave," he told her. "I can arrange it. A new name, a new life. Far away from here." It was the most selfless thing he had ever offered anyone. She turned to look at him then. His face was cast in shadow, but she could see the conflict in his eyes. He was offering her an escape, but his gaze was a cage, willing her to stay. She had come to this apartment for a job, a way to pay off her debts and move on with her life. She had found herself in a world of violence and shadows, a world she should have run from. But she had seen the man inside the monster, the king inside the cripple, and she had called him by his true name. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not going anywhere." He did not smile. Men like Dante Moretti did not smile, but the tension in his shoulders eased. He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the cool glass of the window. His touch was not gentle. It was a brand, a claim. It was the silent, unmistakable acknowledgement of a debt that could never be repaid, and an oath that would never be spoken. In the reflection on the glass, she saw their two figures against the endless night of the city, the broken king on his throne, and the woman who had become his fortress. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she had made her choice.